to just ask, though, each of you to tell us, given all the changes going on, the disruptions in the business, and I know we say this every day, and not everything is being disrupted at the same level, at the same time, in the same country. Nonetheless, my sense is that everybody's job has gotten more complicated. And not just because everybody's on panels all the time and traveling, but everybody's job is more complicated because there is more product, there are more players, there's more money at stake, there's more competition, there are more conflicting forces in government and in technology. So it's something that everybody has to keep up with, a lot of different things. I would just ask each one of you to say what is the biggest challenge for you right now in your job. I'm going to start with you, Gabrielle. What's the biggest challenge? What do you wake up every day and think, what has to happen now?
Okay. Good morning.
Yes, good morning.
So, in our case, Nokia is a technology provider, right? So we are not that much focused on the content. We are more focused on helping our customers, either service providers, broadcasters, content producers, to get their content out there. So yes. Our goal is to give them the agility for them to be able to implement and adapt to the new business models that are coming up. So it's not about, it's about reaching out to the end user and how you can do it easily through the networks of the
So what are they asking you to do that's new and different than it was, say, 5 years ago? What is the biggest thing on their minds?
I think that they want to, so in the past, they took like months or even years to launch a service, right? Now they wanted to do it in weeks, or
so
even less.
The pace of change
is changing a lot.
Has quickened.
Yes. So technology with cloud solutions and with, for example, with like Viaccess-Orca that can provide a solution cloud-based, it's much more faster than it was in the past.
Yes.
So in the past we would take probably 1 year to launch a TV platform. Now we have to do it in weeks. Yes. Especially because there are so many competition and the business model is changing so much that it's necessary to adjust and adapt on a per-day basis, almost.
And for you, Odelay and Valerie, and you can speak separately or together, you have slightly different...
And overlap and...
you can overlap, but...
We're used to that. I would
because
say,
you guys have been in business for some years now,
yes,
right?
together,
and
yeah.
You are transatlantic. You are totally fluent and have a lot of relationships in the States as well as here in Europe. So what's changing for you now? What's the thing that you're having to concentrate on?
As you were saying, things are changing a lot fast every day. And building content for a producer takes time. So that is one thing that we have to adapt to. And we're seeing a lot of new players, so many more interlocutors with all those platforms being launched, where we used to have a few major linear broadcasters. So that is a challenge, but it's also a fantastic opportunity. So I would say that as producer, it's challenging, but it's also fantastic because we've got a lot
more outlets, more potential outlets where your product can go.
And for a producer, the way we envision our job is to find the idea. It's the link between the idea and the audience. So what we do is the idea, we take it to the audience with the help of the broadcaster, either it's an OTT or a platform or DTT or a traditional network. We take the idea to the talents, to the broadcaster, to the audience.
Okay.
So now we have to do it quicker. We have to figure out to who we're going to take it, but it's fantastic because we have much more.
You have much more opportunity in terms of the outlets that you can pitch to. Before I get to Raul, who does a lot of research in this area, I used to think of producers as they sit down, they go off into a room, they think about a great idea, they get the writers, they come up with something and they pitch it. Do you find yourself, Valerie, do you use any research in deciding what it is you want to come up with or whom you want to pitch? Does research come into this? Data, research, metrics, analysis of the business. Do you do any of that?
Of course. Also, what is really challenging, it's because the new players with the new SVOD, and this is the very important things now, instead of the traditional, we are very conservative. It's to find also, as Odile said, IPs, IDs, but also the DNA is really important to match with, the global world. Because these VOD platform, are mostly made for the worldwide, so it's very important to find, that kind of IP. So this is really challenging as well.
Yes.
And I don't know if I answer your question.
No. I think that gives me a sense of it. I do think it's changing for producers too.
Yeah.
They have to be more aware of more elements that go into they're coming up with a product. Is it going to work? Is it going to, as they say, if it doesn't spread, it's dead. Meaning you have to find outlets for these things, and you have to know the market in probably ways that are more complicated than they used to be. You're a researcher. You've done a lot of analysis of all this. What's your take on what has changed for you, Raul, in the last year or two?
So I'll just say that I study the challenges these guys face. So it's very interesting, over the last 10 years. I'll actually start with a little story. I was teaching a class, and I had a senior executive from one of the studio come to the class, and he was giving a guest lecture. And one of the students asked him, so with all the changes in the internet and broadband and Netflix, how do you think, your business model is going to survive? And he said, we are in the business of producing content. And we have survived all the technology changes for last 100 years. So he said, I feel very confident that we will be surviving the technology changes in the next 100 years. In fact, that was very instructive, because if you go outside and you talk to people and you talk to the technology people like Netflix, Amazon, and they sense the competitive advantage to an extent is moving away from people who just produce content.
Yes.
Which really dominated the market. If you look at the history of Hollywood, a few studios, a few record labels, a few book publishers essentially have 70, 80, 90% of the market share. In the last 100 years of the history, there are 6 studios which have 80% of the market share in producing movies. And then suddenly,
You have new players, a few new big
not only
players.
there's new players, suddenly you have players like Amazon and
Yeah.
Netflix and Google. And what do they have? Scale and size, but more importantly, they are the only players who have deep connection to the customers.
Yes.
If you look at the studio, they're almost like a business-to-business seller. They create content and they sell it to the distributor, who distributes out to the customers.
So will the hookup between Time Warner and AT&T, in your view, is that a positive because it will give the studio a more direct relationship to the customer? Is that why it's going to happen?
Well,
I mean, from the point of view of Time Warner.
I think probably what is happening is that everybody in the industry, in my view, is realizing that until you own the customer,
Yes.
until you have access to the customer,
You're
it's
at a
not
disadvantage.
possible to compete as effectively with the Amazon and Netflix of the world. That's their huge competitive advantage. They know the customer, they can market the product, price the product on a one-on-one basis versus the broadcast television where I just stream the content out to millions of people. So if you're AT&T, you're saying, I have the customer.
Yes. Yes.
I can probably compete in this space, but I don't have the content.
Yes.
So Time Warner becomes my way of getting a content, and Time Warner probably is thinking, I have the content, but I don't have the customer.
Well, exactly.
How can we create this, essentially vertical integration? That's really what is happening, right? From content creation to content distribution, Netflix is doing all of that. It's creating content, it's distributing content, it doesn't want anybody in the middle. Amazon is doing the same thing, and I think this market probably is gravitating towards that direction.
Yeah, so what AT&T does with Time Warner, if that deal does go through, one can only imagine, say, a Verizon deciding it needs to go after Viacom,
Comcast or-
Disney, somebody like that. We don't know, and nor do journalists want to get too excited about this, because we all remember what happened when Time Warner merged with AOL. Okay, let's go back to 2000 when it was the biggest merger in the world, and 2 years. It took only 2 years for that thing to completely unravel. So, and that was it. Oh, the internet. Time Warner, now there'll be the internet. It's all fantastic. It was really a very boneheaded and very backward merger, and it did not work. And we must remember the cultures of Hollywood are not the same as the culture of the telcos by any stretch of the imagination. So it's going to be a very interesting thing, and if it happens, I think it will happen, but hopefully they will have learned a few lessons from what happened 15 or so years ago. And I'm sure things like that, you're right, vertical integration is going to happen in Europe too. Before we get on to that business part of it, since we have two producers here, and we think about content, because in the end, that is what consumers are going to be paying for. How do you think viewers' tastes are changing? We had a little bit of this discussion at our table last night, and there were very disparate viewpoints on this. Whether or not viewer tastes in programming, we can think mostly fiction here. Are they becoming more similar around the world, or are they diverging? Or are they similar for some kinds of product and less similar for others? And then the question would be, how do you monetize all of that? But anyway, you two are transatlantic.
Okay.
So you're not just French, you're not just American, you're trying to appeal to different audiences, maybe at the same time with the same product. What do you see? Do you see the world getting more similar, what young people want to watch, or not?
I would say both. I'm sorry, I would say both.
Yeah.
Because there are so many new ways of seeing things and new opportunity. In my point of view, in our point of view, we've seen niche program, niche fiction that will appeal
Two different people,
to
though,
different
right?
people, but to quite a large audience, because it's interesting, because it rises their interest, and we've also seen the need for much more, let's call it classic series and drama that will appeal to the broader audience. But we are seeing a demand for both, for genre, like Amazon is looking for a very typical genre. We've seen anthologies. There are 2 series of anthology and currently a 3rd one that's in prep. So, and these are very, very niche.
Very specific and very niche.
Specific. I would quote an example on Cineflix in Canada has produced a show called Pure, and it's about a community. It's about a Canadian community, a little bit like Amish people, who were sent to Mexico several years ago, and they still lived there as they used to live 100, 200 years ago. But there was a terrible draw, and they started to traffic drugs in between the frontier. So you're talking about a very, very specific community of Amish Canadian brought to Mexique. So how more niche can it be?
But what are you saying? It appealed to a lot more people than it surprised you.
Then we would think. So it's either niche or very, very classical procedural show, and I can see the appeal for both. There is, what is Sarando? Netflix says there is something for everyone.
Yeah,
Not everything is for everyone, but there is something for everyone. That's
I mean, you think of things like Game of Thrones or, on a high... There are certain series generally that have a lot of money behind them. Not always. No. The trick would be if they didn't have, but the big ones, that travel around the world tend to be very well financed, and they appeal to a certain segment of society almost across the board, certainly in the United States and in Europe, but even elsewhere. And then there are these sort of little niches that you can find where certain types of shows appeal in one country or one region, et cetera. I guess what I'm trying to get at is, where do you see the monetary possibility? What kind of programming do you think is the kind that you can make that will travel? That I think is the question.
I think.
I mean, it's first of all
there
fiction.
are so many. Yeah, you're talking about fiction producer. There are so many stories. So it's about. It's not the story. It's about how you're going to tell it. Mm-hmm. But I see, and again with the multiplication of players, I see no limitation. It's fantastic.
Yeah.
I mean, I don't see a particular angle. You can have procedural. You can have serialized. But I don't see any limitation, and that's why I think it's very, very exciting where the place we're standing at the moment.
Yeah.
Yeah, no, we are a French production company, but we're doing a lot of shows for the international audience. Means that, of course, the audience has been educated, had been educated by the new SVOD platform and what they offer. And of course, it's challenging for the traditional one as well. So what we want to say is we are trying to find and developing, very strong IPs. Most of them are from France. You can take the example of Versailles. Versailles is made by a French production company, but for the world market, for the worldwide.
Yes.
And but we can take the example of that, and there is many things like that. Series made by Netflix for Netflix, The Crown. It's really made, it's a British story, but everyone all over the world.
Well, that's what I'm saying. There are these very high-end ones, and generally it takes a very big company behind them to get the financing, get the stars, and make those things. And they travel very well. And then there are these... The Crown, it was British. They didn't spend as much as they probably do to make certain things in America, but...
100 million for 10 episodes.
How much, sorry?
100 million for 10 episodes.
Yeah, The Crown is very, very well financed.
Yeah, it was well financed. Well, the Brits are good. The Brits are generally good at that. Yeah, they are. They are very good at that. Better than the Americans at that. But from your perspective, Raoul, do you see the high-end stuff remaining a very positive part of the international business, or do you see a shift towards cheaper, more local, more cost-effective programming? Or is it going to be both ends?
So if you think the shift going on in the 10 years ago, the broadcaster broadcasted the product to the user. In this world of on-demand, non-linear TV watching, it's the consumers who is logging into the system and saying, what do I want to watch?
Yes.
It creates immediately opportunities to have more niche content, because you might like something else, and I might like something else, and you might like something else. And the goal for some of these OTT services is essentially to figure out a way to recommend things that might suit our taste. Now, we might disagree with how good their recommendation is, but at the end of the day, with the Netflix having hundreds and thousands of hours of programming, their big challenge is, how can I recommend out of these thousands of hours of programming something that Patricia might like, which is differently than what Bruce might like, and which is different than mine.
And do you think they do the best job in terms of recommendations?
I think that's really where the technology is going. I think, I'm sure we all disagree at some level what recommendation they're giving us, but at the same time, That's really, tremendous amount of technology leaps and is growing in that direction. And I think it's getting better and better. I was reading a story about Spotify. Spotify has what is called the Discovery playlist. There is every week they update the songs. They send us a list of songs that only appeal to us. It is one of the most popular feature on Spotify. And the whole thing is completely driven by what is called the deep machine learning. There is no human involved. Mm-hmm. So the machine learning looks at these millions of songs that we hear, millions of song people like us hear, millions of songs of our friends hear, and it then tries to figure out 20 songs
that would make the top list.
That will appeal to us,
yes.
Which is going to be different than what appeals to you.
Yes.
And so what at some level, I think what you said is exactly right. On one hand, we have going to be a lot of niche content because your taste is different than mine, but then there is also going to be a tentpole content that appeals very broadly, right?
To everybody.
Have the Game of Thrones, and you're going to have the House of Cards, and so I see both the head and the tail sort of really exploding to an extent, especially the tail.
Yeah, I think you're touching here one of the big challenge. How will the audience know about our project?
Exactly.
Yes, with fragmentation, how are they going to find you?
How are you going to, exactly.
If it doesn't spread, it's dead. In other words, you have to be able to reach a finite number of people who will help fund
casts and
pay for this.
High-end casts will help. So it gets us to a certain price, because you were talking about budgets.
Yes,
so you either have something very, very edgy, or something that will appeal to more people. But it's tough to. As producer, we're not inclined to go through the small budget alley.
You want to play in a larger field, a more upmarket field,
yes.
where you think there's more opportunity or more, certainly more money. And nonetheless, though, there is a lot of content out there already. And as Bruce was saying, peak TV, sure, it started about 20 years ago, but what it is now, 500 dramas and comedies produced in the United States in 2016, 500. And a lot of it of very high quality, but some of it, not so much, but 500 that found an outlet in the States, but many of which are finding it very difficult to get placed internationally. And that means they're going to have deficits, that aren't going to be made up. So it's a very competitive, very difficult. There's a lot of product out there. Yes, there are a lot of new SVOD players, but they're not putting on Breaking Bad and Mad Men yet. They're doing more niche programming. So there's something of a disconnect between the amount of material out there and the kind of platforms that are willing and able to pick them up, which is one of the points I think you were making yesterday. So what else, Gabrielle, would you say on the pricing front? How are your clients, how are they coping? What platforms seem to be thriving best? In what parts of Europe, and why are they working?
So I think that the pricing issue is for sure a key one. And we all talk about SVOD, but at the end, like you said, there are lots of programs that are not being able to be available for many of the people. So in our case, most of our customers are service providers. So they tend to act as aggregators. They strike deals with Netflix and other SVOD platforms. At the end, I think that they will have to have more deals, because if you just rely on having SVOD to reach out to your consumers, you might be very successful, like Netflix has been in the past, but you might also launch a SVOD and you don't get your name out there, so you don't get your content to be viewed. So at the end, this also relates to price. Are people really willing to pay for lots of SVOD offerings out there? Do you want to pay to have 5, 6, or 7 SVOD subscriptions per month? Or do you want to pay for a subscription that gives you an amount of content that you can consume in a reasonable way?
And where do you see it going? Where do you see most consumers in Europe
I think that
tilting?
In Europe we have a lot of convergent markets, So where people are buying telecom services together with television, that happens across most of the countries. But we also see SVOD coming up. But like in the previous panel was mentioned, Netflix already has like 90 deals with the telecom operators to have their service inside the bundle of the telecom operator. So probably that's going to be the way. You can differentiate by that, having more SVOD subscriptions inside a basic service that you buy, where you get the linear TV and some content, not for free, but like you have it today as a standard linear broadcast service.
Yeah.
But it will depend a lot on the cultural and the content, and it will depend on the people. We also see that, for example, millennials are not buying traditional TV services now, but maybe they buy in the next 10, 15 years. So it's still
Well,
very
because
unclear.
they're going to change. They're not going to, well, they may still be called millennials, but they're not going to be
gonna change,
25 anymore.
Yes.
So presumably they will want something different. You see this, you see these young people, and you've seen some of them grow into a different kind of behavior? Yes or no? What do you think?
So I think obviously the cord-cutting behavior is probably real. Especially if I talk to my students, I mean, nobody has TV package or TV channel or TV subscription. They all are on the internet. In fact, I look at my kid, he's 13-year-old. Mostly, he just wants to gravitate towards YouTube. I mean, I was shocked. One day he was watching Super Bowl. Later, 2 days later, some Super Bowl clips on YouTube. And I said, why don't you have it on the real? He said, it's too boring. It's 3 hours. This is much better. In 15 minutes, I get to see everything I need to see. So, but, it's when they grow up, I mean, I think what is going to happen to an extent is the SWAT market is going to consolidate. I don't think that in the US there is going to be space for hundreds of different SWAT players. I think it's going to consolidate into 2-3 large players because just there is a large network effect. I want to subscribe to a service which has a lot of content, and content creator want to go to a service which has a lot of subscribers. So
Yes, yeah.
I think eventually consolidation is a must, whether Netflix or Amazon, whoever, or Google, whoever wins. I fully expect no more than 2 or 3 essentially really major players, and then there might be a few niche ones. But so I think all the content is essentially going to go
Well, as it's already happened in the production area.
That's right.
There are the big major players,
That's right.
and there are the little guys.
That's right.
There's nobody in the middle.
Correct.
So you think that will be what happens on the SVOD
Totally.
front? Oh, that's going to be so interesting. Can we take 1 or 2 questions from the audience? There's so much we didn't touch on. Anybody?
We didn't spoke about Facebook and Twitter and all the other players. Actually, I've been very impressed by the last Facebook app on the Apple TV. They are trying to do things we feel they try to experience, and I guess they are getting a lot of data from it. So, especially for the production companies, how do you see this Facebook that could go on, let's say, paid content? I don't know, maybe.
Meaning creating its own, or at least buying it,
Yeah.
or buying in. I mean, Apple announced that it was doing its first original last week there in San Francisco, and now Facebook is making signals about doing its own video. Anyway, what is your take on these other players getting into the business?
So in our case, for example, Facebook, where we see is a concern around piracy, because we see, for example, in Europe, lots of protected content being distributed via Facebook Live. If they are going to get into producing their own content or not.
They may have a different attitude towards piracy. Okay, yes, exactly.
For me, it's quite unclear. I think that everybody wants to do a lot. At the end, not everybody will be successful, and there will, for sure, some people that fail. But I see Facebook more on a let's say, user-generated content than standard content that you can see on TV. We see a lot of demand for people that are looking for platforms where you can upload your own video. So something similar like YouTube. You can stream it live, you can stream it offline. but it's more on that sense. Regarding producing content, I really cannot say on Facebook.
Yeah, okay. What about you, Raul? Do you see it differently, similarly?
So the advantage Facebook has is it has the customer data, but I think the Netflix has established that you don't want to go too much into the ad-supported business model. You want to go to the subscription business model where you can collect the hard cash from people, because the ad-supported business model has its own significant challenges, and I don't think Netflix wants to go in that direction. So the challenge for Facebook is, can it get people to shell out when it has already provided free service, right? Facebook is our beloved platform to an extent because it's free, you know? So converting people from free to paid is a huge challenge.
Yes.
And
That's why
Spotify
we
will
have
tell you
piracy,
that, you know,
yes.
biggest challenge Spotify has is how do you get people to now move away from free to a paid subscription? So if Facebook goes in that direction, probably the huge challenge it has is exactly that.
Yeah.
And I think, you know, you are also right that Facebook is associated more with the user-generated content.
More like YouTube, yeah.
Getting the
Yeah.
premium player to pony up and, you know, become the platform. You know, who knows? I mean, you know, anything is possible.
Okay.
But maybe they are a little late to this train now. You know.
Okay. I have one final question for everybody, very short. So, what are each of you doing personally in your job to prepare for coming disruption? I mean, we've all heard, all the panels have been about what's going to happen in the next 3 to 5 years. Plenty's going to happen. It may not be the end of linear TV, but clearly people are going to be accessing things differently. There are going to be new players. There are going to be some mega mergers. Some may work, some may not work. What do you personally do to prepare for the future? Raul, I'm starting with you. Go down this way. Very briefly.
See, I'm an academic and I'm a researcher. Let me just tell you one thing. When I work with some of the studios, and
Yes.
one thing that I immediately recognize, that compared to the Netflix and Amazon, who are they not only have a lot of data, they're very data savvy. You know, they hire people who can deal with the data. They hire computer science PhDs, they hire economics PhD, and they're leveraging their data to make better decisions every day. Not every decision is good, but they're using it extensively. You know, when you talk to the traditional players, the studios, for example, they just don't have, first, they don't have good data. They do have sometimes, but they don't have the skill and the culture to actually use the data to make decisions. It's very gut feel driven decision. This is how I used to do things. This is how I'll continue to do things. One of the, I guess, my challenge is to work with, I have been working very extensively with a bunch of the players and trying to get them to use their data to make decisions. And I see it in, every day. The data tells them they should be doing X. There is no dispute about it. They will agree that data says they should do X, and they end up doing Y. Because they say, this is what I have been doing Y for last 50 years. I can't do X. And I said, but it's your own data. You will make more money if you do X. But I think it's going to take a long time before they start believing their own data. So I feel like I see that all the time.
That's the
big challenge is that how do the creative people, to get them to see that, data can be an aid to them. It can supplement and complement their business decisions.
I think that they're afraid that rather than it be an aid to them, it will completely drive their decisions, and gut instinct about what works creatively will not count for as much. Quickly. Oh, we've got to wrap. Go ahead, Gabriel. What is the biggest? What do you do?
So our goal is to help our customers.
So you get up earlier every morning and
try
read,
to
look
help
at data.
them be more agile and be capable of delivering more business models and make money out of the services they want to provide to the end users.
We research, we try to see everything that's out there too. So we're collecting lots of data in our field, and I hope we're...
And if I can add something very personal, because we can talk about dream. So my dream for the next future is to produce very ambitious series with a lead female characters as a French woman producer.
Okay. Well, that's important. All right. I think this has been fascinating to hear all of you, and for your viewpoints have been most inspiring. I want to thank Odile and Valerie and Gabrielle and Raoul. Thank you, audience. We're going to take a break and have coffee.